What is going on, Pokemon TCG enjoyers? Ciaran here with another video. So our 2024-2025 Pokemon season has just begun, which means league challenges and cups are being held worldwide. So I thought today I would go over my top 10 decks to bring to these cups and challenges and let you know my thoughts on each of them with some list. So when you play a local, it is most likely going to be best of 30 minutes instead of best of 3 like a regional or international you might be used to. I know some areas do best of 3, but for the most part it's best of 1. So I have kept that in mind when making my list, and you should also keep that in mind when you're picking your deck. This is just my opinion on the top 10, so if you disagree with any of them, just let me know in the comments below. Always happy to engage in thoughtful discussion. But without further ado, let's get into the list. Alright, so let's start off this list with the honorable mentions, and we're going to start with Gholdengo. It's a deck I honestly love to play. It is super fun. Its ability is cool. Its attack is basically similar to Chien-Pao, so I like it. So on paper, I think Gholdengo actually seems pretty solid. In theory, it has a lot of strong matchups since you can one-shot anything with the Make It Rain attack. But the thing that really holds this deck back for me is the deck is just super inconsistent in its setup. Once you get set up, the deck feels very smooth. You have coin bonuses to draw cards. If you can set up the Bibarel, you can have a draw engine. But its early game is fairly weak. It can't make the best use of Irida since the Gholdengo line isn't water type. So you do have the Palkia and the Greninja for the early game. You have the Prime Catcher clone package to try and trade up 2 for 1 with Greninja. But it's just the deck just doesn't set up a lot of times, which isn't the best for the best of 1 environment. If you do want to play this deck, I recommend checking out the list that JW and Jesse Parker played. They both got top 256 at NAIC. The thing I like about their list is they put the Bibarel in, and it might seem counterintuitive since you already have the coin bonus from Gholdengo. But this is a really combo-heavy deck. You need to string together turns of Super Retrieval, Vessels, Rods, things of that nature. So if you have the Bibarel in combination with the Gholdengos, you can stream knockouts late into the game, which I really like. The other thing I don't love about this deck is it doesn't have an easy one prize attacker to use. You have Greninja, but it requires you to set up the Palkia, and in some matchups, there's not really a target for the Greninja, so you kind of have to go and feed your opponent 2 prizes to attack. So Gholdengo is a lot of fun. Definitely can have success with it, but it's just going to miss making my top 10. Alright, next up for our honorable mentions, I have Lost Tina. I don't have much to say about this. I just feel like it's just not the best Lost Zone deck right now. I feel like if you want to play Lost Zone deck, just play normal Lost Box. But I know a lot of people are Giratina enjoyers from earlier formats or earlier in the season. My problem with Giratina right now is it just doesn't have that many good matchups. We see Gardevoir playing Fluttermane, sometimes Klefki. If you look at Stefan's list, or a lot of lists that came out at NAIC are playing probably 2 of those Pokemon that lock. You're not great into Raging Bolt since they can just one-shot the Tinas with ease. You kind of struggle with Lugia. And your good matchups are just honestly decks that aren't that popular. I will say your bad matchups aren't that bad. They're still fairly close. Probably 45, 55s or 40, 60s. But it's just one of those decks where you have to grind out a lot of your games. And the decks that are popular in the meta right now are just not the best matchups for Tina. So maybe Tina could make a bounce back one day, and you can have success with this deck. I just think the meta is not really primed for it to pop off right now. Alright, kicking off our top 10, I have Regidrago here in 10th place. I think this is a deck that's been picking up a lot of steam lately. It's been seeing a lot more play in online tournaments. It's a deck I've personally been playing a lot, just because I think it's super fun. The reason I have it kind of farther down the list right now is it does struggle into, honestly, some of those popular decks. It's really poor into Raging Bolt, it's not that strong to Lugia, and its Gardevoir matchup is a little bit shaky. It does beat a lot of the fringe decks, and you have a strong Lost Zone matchup, which I really like. And the other thing is you can kind of build the deck to your liking, picking which dragon types to put in. I do think the deck will get really strong once we have Shattered Fable, since the deck is getting Kyurem, which is a huge boost for the deck and will improve some of the matchups. So I think this deck can see success. You just have to be very cognizant of what your metagame is like. If you have a metagame that's very light on Raging Bolt, then I think Regidrago can see success. Otherwise, I think the Raging Bolt is probably going to hold this deck back a little too much. The list I picked out here is the one from NAIC. Jacob I got top 16. For my testing, the list has honestly been pretty good. You have some flexibility. You can maybe cut the Penny for other support if you like. You can maybe cut the Cleffa for a Halucha or something like that. But the deck does struggle with consistency sometimes. So that's another limiting factor. So probably keep the Cleffa. But yeah, if you're looking to have fun with a deck that's competitive, I definitely think Regidrago is one to check out. At number 9, I have Raging Bolt. I think this might seem a little low for this deck, but I just think it's, again, similar to Regidrago. It kind of struggles into a lot of the popular matchups in the meta right now. It's very poor into Gardevoir, which I think is, spoiler alert, one of the best decks. And it does struggle a bit into Lugia as well if they get set up. But the thing I do really enjoy about Raging Bolt is the deck is super fast, it's super consistent. You should get to execute your strategy most games. The problem being is that if your opponent executes their strategies, a lot of times the deck just can't prize trade since you don't have a super strong one prize attacker. So there's a couple approaches you can take with this deck. This first list I'm showing you here is from Brandon Salazar. He got top 16 at NAIC. I really like this approach to the deck. It's just super consistent and super turbo and aggressive. He's playing 4 copies of the Trekking Shoes as well as the Pokemon Catchers. I think the Pokemon Catchers really let you cheese some games. If your opponent, for example, only has like 1 Lugia on their bench, you can pull it up. If you want to get like a more consistent like 2-2-2 prize map, it gives you the ability to play Sawda plus a Gust in the same turn. So I've been a really big fan of that. If you play in a metagame with a lot of Gardevoir, you could maybe check out the list similar to what our friend Shashi played. He was on my podcast. Go check that out. He actually incorporated the jamming towers into his list to give him a little bit of a better shot against Gardevoir. So if you go first and you draw a tower, you can block Kim Evo. If they do the Drifloon play with the tool, you can shut that off and effectively take a prize. And he also plays the Flutter Mane to try and improve his Lost Box matchup a little bit more. So I think this approach to the deck, if you know what your metagame is like, you can kind of tech the deck. But if you're kind of going to a blind metagame, I'd suggest a list similar to Brandon's where it's just consistent, turbo, and you know what you're getting. But either way, I think Raging Bolt's a really solid pick to bring to League Cups. It's consistent, it's fast, and you can see success with it. All right, number 8, I have Blocklax. I think one thing I do want to note is if you're playing best of 1, I think Blocklax gets a lot worse. It's very easy for your opponent to kind of stall you out when you're playing this deck. If you're playing a best of 3 League Cup, I actually think Blocklax is actually much stronger. It's much more common to win rounds like 1-0 or even 2-0 if you have to. The one thing I would say though, just in general about Blocklax, is it's not the best into Lugia and a strong Gardevoir player. So the list I kind of picked out is the one from Top 16 IC, Ben Cryer. They have the Handheld Fan, which I think if you want to improve your Gardevoir matchup, that's a really good card to play. But otherwise, I think Blocklax is actually pretty good. It beats a lot of the, I guess, Tier 2 decks, and it kind of struggles against Tier 1. But those matchups are honestly still winnable. I'd say Lugia is probably the one matchup that's really hard to win. But every other matchup, I think, is very winnable, and at a League Cup, like if the skill levels vary, you can punish a lot of players who aren't familiar with playing against control style strategies. So yeah, if you're playing best of 3 cups, definitely consider Blocklax more. If you're playing best of 1, just make sure you know how to play Blocklax very quickly and you feel comfortable asking your opponents to pick up their pace of play if necessary. All right, at number 7, we have Miraidon, and I think Miraidon's an interesting spot in the meta. I feel like it loses to a lot of like the fringe or like tier 2 decks, but it's actually very good against a lot of the meta decks. Well, obviously it's very good against Lugia, like you should win almost every time. It's probably like close to even, probably slightly favored against Gardevoir, probably even slightly favored against Lost Box as well, just because you do have Iron Hands to be super aggressive in those matchups. But otherwise the deck kind of struggles a little bit against everything else. So if you live in an area where you know your metagame is very highly concentrated with those top decks, especially Lugia, that's when I would pull up Miraidon. Because the deck does kind of lack some firepower as the game goes on. You're a pure aggressive deck trying to just take knockouts on your first attacking turn. You do have like the Iron Thorns for a little bit of that ability lock, but otherwise it's mainly just go fast, go aggressive. So I personally don't like playing Miraidon a lot, but I would tell you it's a very simple deck to play, very easy and very fast. So if you kind of like these type of decks, I think Miraidon could be a good choice for your locals. All right, coming in at number 6, we have Dragapult. The deck definitely did not live up to the hype it had at the start of our format, but I think it's kind of settled into a solid spot in Tier 2. We have, I think, kind of concluded now that the best way to play this deck is with Pidgeot. It just gives you the options to find what you need when you need it, and you can also play it with like a 1-1 Charizard line to kind of beef up your energy acceleration and give yourself an alternate attacker. So Dragapult's not very good in metagames where there's a lot of Lugia and Raging Bolt, which are 2 of the most popular decks, which is why I have this farther down on the list. I do think your Gardevoir matchup's pretty close. I do think you're really strong into stuff like Charizard. You're close against Lost Box. And I think the nice thing about playing Dragapult is a really strong pilot can make the deck go far. So I would definitely suggest practicing with Dragapult if you're going to take it to a tournament. But I think the deck is pretty solid. Just make sure you don't live in an area that has a lot of Raging Bolt or Lugia, which might be rare. Coming in at number 5, we have my favorite deck, Chien-Pao. I think Chien-Pao has definitely fallen off since last format, where I think it was definitely a tier 1 deck. I think in this format, it has a lot of fringe matchups, I would say, or 50-50 matchups. I do think its Lugia and Raging Bolt and Lost Box matchups are honestly won and lost on the coin flip and setup. Against Raging Bolt, it's whoever takes 2 prizes first. Lugia, kind of similar. Lost Box, if you go second, they're going to Greninja you turn 2. But the reason I do have Chien-Pao placed somewhat high on this list is it has a very strong Gardevoir EX matchup. Gardevoir EX definitely dominated NAIC. It's definitely the most popular deck right now. So having a strong matchup into that is great. Also, Charizard seems to be on a bit of a rise. Chien-Pao's also strong into that. And then its bad matchups are honestly not that popular. One of its worst matchups is Snorlax, which in a best of 1 environment isn't that popular, so you probably don't have to worry about that. And then it is weak to stuff like Dragapult and Regidrago, which plays Dragapult, which aren't huge in the meta. So if you are someone who enjoys playing Chien-Pao, I would say it's definitely fine to take the tournaments right now. If you live in an area with lots and lots of Gardevoir and like Charizard, so I guess like evolution players, definitely recommend Chien-Pao for a metagame like that. And the list is pretty simple. This is a list played by my fellow C-Pao connoisseurs at NAIC. I'd say the one cuttable card is probably the Enhanced Hammer. So if you do want to add something like a 4th rare candy, or you want to add a canceling cologne, which I think could be quite strong to just kind of shore up your Gardevoir and Charizard matchup and make them even better, you can probably cut the Enhanced Hammer. All right, at number 4, we have an old favorite. We have Charizard EX. I think Charizard prematurely fell off in popularity in this format. I think everyone got excited to play all the new decks, but I think Charizard is still super strong. It might not be the best deck in format like it previously was, but it is very well positioned. And I think if you've played Charizard in the past, it's a great deck to pick up again. So I think the main reason to play Charizard is you do have a favorable Gardevoir matchup. It is pretty solid into Lugia as well, so picking up some really good matchups against popular decks. And I'd say it's pretty even into the Lost Box and into Raging Bolt as well. Against Raging Bolt, you definitely need to be making use of the Radiant Charizard, which this deck honestly can do pretty easily, and just pair that with Disruption. And then your bad matchups are honestly not that popular. Like you're weak to Snorlax, which is kind of like not that popular. You're weak to Dragapult, which is a little popular, but not that popular. Regidrago is a bad matchup, which is going up in play, but again, like these are fringe decks. You can probably afford to take a loss in Swiss to them. The list I'd recommend like starting with is the list by the Brazilian duo from NAIC. When you play Pidgeot, you can afford to play a bunch of techs, so you can fit stuff in like the Mist Energy, the Jamming Towers, the Temple of Sinnoh, and for the A-Spec, you can fit in the Unfair Stamp as well now, which is really strong to give this deck even more disruption as early as, I guess, the second turn of the game. So I definitely think Charizard's in a good spot. If you've played Charizard before, definitely pick it back up again. This is definitely a deck that can take down some League Cups. All right, starting off our top 3 here, I do have Lugia. I think Lugia on paper is like the best deck. You have pretty much a lot of favorable matchups or slightly even matchups and only a couple bad ones across the table. But the one weakness Lugia does have is it's a little inconsistent, a little prone to some bricks. But if you're okay with that, I think Lugia is a fantastic choice. If you're going to a high volume of cups and challenges, I actually think Lugia makes more sense since you can kind of smooth out that variance in the long run. I definitely think you'll have a good conversion rate with it. There's a couple ways you can play Lugia. You can play it with Cinccino or without. So I'll just start off with this list I've pulled from Isaiah Chaville that does play the Cinccino line. The one card I think is really good to play as well is the Roseanne's Backup. This way, just any deck that plays Enhanced Hammer, or if they play Sinnoh and take out your Legacy Energy early, you do have the option to recycle it and use it again. This is especially powerful against Gardevoir decks. But there's also a version you can play without the Cinccino if you'd like. This is a list Alex Szymanski got top 32 NAIC with. So you trade in the Cinccino for the Iron Hands and the basic Lightning Energies. This way you're less susceptible to Enhanced Hammer, so this kind of like bolsters your Gardevoir matchup a little bit. You do play the the Drapion V to have that option to one-shot Gardevoir yet, and then you have the weirder V to one-shot big Pokemon. So I say Alex's list is definitely better against Gardevoir, but it is worse against things that have a lot of health. So things like Charizard. I think it actually makes your Dragapult matchup slightly worse as well, just because you don't have as easy of a time taking those big one-shots. But Lugia is a super solid deck. I think even if you don't want to play it at League Cups and Challenges, you definitely need to be aware of this deck, since I predict it will be quite popular. Alright, my runner-up deck is going to be Lost Box, the deck that just took down NAIC. I think Lost Box across the board is pretty much favorable or even to the most popular decks. Your bad matchups are probably less popular. And the other thing with Lost Box is you have a lot of agency over your games. You have the opportunity to make a lot of plays and look for those opportunities to outplay your opponent, which I think is really great in a local environment. I think probably Andrew Hedrick's list is probably where you should just start, or honestly even copy. I think his list is really, really good for the locals best of one format. It's super consistent. Playing that 4 copies of Pokestop with the 3 vacuums, it is super quick, which is fantastic. I guess the one thing to be wary of is Gardevoir players are looking to maybe play Klefki and Fluttermane, or 2 copies of Fluttermane now, which does make that matchup slightly worse. It's still winnable. But I think if you've played Lost Box in the past, or you like this style of deck, I think it's in a fantastic position. And this is one of the best decks to play if you're looking to take down your locals. And coming in as our best deck for locals, I do have Gardevoir EX. I don't think this is a surprise. This deck dominated NAIC, and I think it'll continue to dominate locals everywhere. I just think Gardevoir just has such a good matchup spread. Your bad matchups aren't that popular, and the deck just has so many ways that you can do little tricks, make plays, come from behind, which I think is super valuable. I think there's a couple ways you can play it. So I think the biggest thing is the A-Spec choice. So you can play Unfair Stamp, or you can play the Hyper Aroma. So this first list I'm showing you is a list the Australian group played at NAIC with the Unfair Stamp. I really like this list. They have the TM Devolution in there to kind of help in the mirror match, help against decks like Charizard and Chien-Pao, which are some of your worst matchups, make them a little bit better, which I think is really awesome. But the list I've actually been playing lately that I really enjoyed, I got third at a league challenge the other night with it, is the list from Henry Chow. It actually forgoes playing Drifloon and Bravery Charm altogether in favor of playing Double Monkey, Double Flyer, and Triple Dark. This build is definitely a more control style of Gardevoir. You're kind of focused on using that Fluttermane to lock people out, using the Double Monkey to really spread damage around, and then use that Technical Machine Devolution in like Mirror Match, Charizard, Chien-Pao, like that. You do make your Raging Bolt matchup worse by not playing the Bravery Charm and Drifloon, but you honestly pick up a lot of percentage points in the mirror and against Lost Box as well, which I really like about this version. So I live in an area that has a lot of Gardevoir players and a lot of Lost Zone players, so I've been favoring this build. So if you're in an area like that, I think this is like a build style to consider. But if you're like just want a list that can kind of cover everything, you're going to go into a blind meta, I do recommend maybe just playing that more standard list with the Drifloon and the Bravery Charms. But either way, I do think Gardevoir is the strongest deck, and if this is a deck you enjoy playing, definitely take it to your locals. If you're looking for even more tips to get better, you can check out my video I did with Josh Frink on Gardevoir EX, and I also know James Cox did a great video with Stefan as well. So check those out if you're looking to get better at Gardevoir. So that's going to be it for today's video. Let me know in the comments below what you think about my list, what you agree, disagree, any decks I may have forgot, and let me know what you've been playing at your locals or what you plan on playing. I'm always curious to hear what people are playing. If you enjoyed today's video, consider dropping a like and maybe subscribing. I make lots of competitive Pokemon TCG content, so would love to have you around if you want to watch some more. But yeah, thanks for watching, and best of luck at all your cups and challenges. I hope you win as many as possible.